up, Cypress students? I'm Brittany, and we're in our first week of our new series, Free People. Alright guys, I like to start off with a little story. So you're going to hear about young Brittany. I think I was probably like 9 years old. I was at my sister's spending the night, and I'm eating dinner with them, and she puts peas on my plate, and I'm like, I'm not eating those. And she's like, yes, you are. I was like, Mom would not make me eat these peas. She's like, you have to eat them. So me, I don't really love to be told what to do, so I put these peas in the side of my cheek, and I held them there for I don't know how long until we finished cleaning up our dishes. I go outside and I just spit all of these peas into the cornfield next to her house. And I probably tasted them way longer than if I had just swallowed them, but it was the principle of the matter. I didn't want to follow the rules, you know? And so as a civilization, we've had rules for as long as time has been, right? And we've had people that didn't want to follow those rules. And so if you've ever wanted to rebel, you're not alone. And so people respond differently to rules. Maybe some people push back every rule just because they can, and other people maybe follow them because they think it's a rule for a reason, right? So no matter how you deal with rules and laws, at some point you're gonna find one that you don't like, that you don't agree with, that makes you feel caged in, makes you feel like it's restricting your freedom. How many of you guys like curfew? I don't. And maybe it's a dress code that you feel caged in by. Maybe it's a phone restriction that you don't like, or who you're allowed to hang out with. Or maybe it's something that God has said for you to do or not to do. And we can feel like we're boxed into these rules, or we can feel trapped by them, like we're caged in, like there's a lock and we can't get out of it. It can be frustrating, especially at your age, where you feel you're stuck between childhood and adulthood, dependence and independence, and rules and freedom. And so you're ready to move on to a lot of freedom, but you feel like you have a lot of rules and a lot of adults that you still have to obey. And so what do we do with those rules? What do we do with that frustration that we have? And what does the Bible say about it? And so that's what we're going to look at today. But first, you already heard about young Brittany and how she didn't like to follow rules. That's kind of carried on in my life. And so when I was in college, I was like a freshman, 18. I go away to a Christian college, and there was a lot of rules, and there was a lot of people over me that were authority figures that I'm supposed to, as we know, God says that we got to respect authority, right? And so I had RAs, which were in charge of our dorms, and we had rules such as curfew, and you're supposed to be in by 12. And I knew I was supposed to respect the authority, that God asked me to do that, but I also had friends that I wanted to hang out with that weren't in my dorm that I wanted to hang out with past 12. And so that was this tension. Did I follow what God said and respect these authority figures, or did I do what Brittany wanted to do and hang out with people past curfew? And so a lot of people think that God has a list of rules that is a mile long, right? And when we're fighting for independence and freedom, God can feel like just another person telling us what to do. And so we're going to look at James today. And James, the book of James was written by Jesus' brother, and he grew up Jewish, and they had a bunch of rules, right? And so the Jewish people are kind of arguing back and forth whether they still had to follow all of these rules or if Jesus changed everything. And so some of the rules that they have were obvious, don't kill someone, right? But then they had some other rules don't wear clothes that are made of more than one fabric. If you see an ox on the side of the road, then take it to its owner immediately. That you weren't allowed to eat shrimp or bacon. And so some of these seemed weird, but all of them had a purpose for the Jewish people. Maybe it was to keep them healthy, or to set them apart from other nations, or to live peacefully, but all of them connected them to God. When Jesus showed up, a lot of that changed. And so James is kind of explaining to the people how Jesus changed it. So we're going to look at James chapter 1. It says, "But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it is like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God will bless you for doing it. So let's break it down a little bit. He starts off by saying, do what God says, right? And maybe you've heard someone like, just be quiet and do what I tell you to. And that's what you think of, but that's not exactly what he's saying. He's not saying shut up and don't eat bacon. And then he goes on to say that God helps us to see ourselves clearly, like in a mirror. That these laws help to see ourselves clearly. But how can not eating bacon, help me see myself more clearly? And then he says that following God's laws gives us freedom. And you might be saying, how? How can laws that make us feel trapped help us to have freedom? And so Jesus isn't talking about those hundreds of laws that the Jewish people had. He's talking about the law that Jesus changed, the new rule that he gave that changed everything. And so we're going to look at another passage in Matthew when Jesus was still on earth. He's talking to these religious leaders who knew all of the laws really well. They knew like every detail of it. And so they're asking Jesus, what is the greatest law? And they're thinking that Jesus is going to talk about one that they know really well, but he ends up giving them a new one. So we're going to look at Matthew 22, and it says, one of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap Jesus with this question, Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the commandments are based on these two. And so he says that the two most important commandments, the ones that are based on everything else, are to love God and love others as yourself. And so Jesus is saying all of the commands hang on these two things. If we are truly loving God and loving others, then we're already following God's law. That we see ourselves more clearly when we see how we are loving God and loving others, it shows us how well we are following God's law. And that we can find freedom in those two things. Because before Jesus showed up, the religious leaders think that they have to follow these thousands of rules and to earn God's love and to earn his acceptance and his love. But if we follow this law of loving him and loving others, then we don't have to worry about that. He changed these two things, that we don't have to keep the law in order to earn his respect, that he loves us no matter what, and that we don't have to follow these thousands of rules if we just follow that one of loving others. So this takes me back to when I was in college, when I didn't want to follow what the RAs were asking me to do, right? I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And so if I was loving them well, it would be not creating more work for them, not creating where they have to come and find me when I'm not in by curfew. Loving them would be respecting them, right? And so we had all of these rules that we felt trapped by. And so if we use that one key of love God and love others, then that gives us freedom from this. That instead of feeling locked in by curfew, it's asking yourself, how can I better love my parents instead of making them worry about me and stay up late? If it's maybe your phone restrictions, instead of texting and driving, it's asking yourself, how can I better love the people around me? If we look at it about how we can love God and love others, it changes how we look at these rules and feeling caged in. So God's law sets us free to love God and to love others. It helps us to see that no matter what we've done, that God's love for us never fails. And we're always going to have these rules that we don't want to follow, that we don't agree with, that we don't understand. But this rule of loving God and loving others sets us free from that. And so we are going to be talking about this all month long. We're going to be looking at rules and how we follow God better and how we love others. And so join us next week to hear some more about that. See you next time.